that's been put together by NAPTIP. And I have in the studios to help us talk more about this and shed more light on it, Mrs. Tolu Olugbesan, and she's the Assistant Director, Research and Program Department from NAPTIP itself. I would say this though, I heard about this sexual register coming up like last year. So how has it taken so long for it to finally be put out there?
Well, it's not easy. There are so many things that had to be taken into consideration. So the most important thing is we are here.
It's happening.
It's happening.
Better late than never. but I mean, because I'm still a little wary of the fact that we're 36 states plus the FCT. You have 37 cities, right? And the only states who seem to have thought about making this an important part of their legislation and their governance is Lagos and Ekiti, right? And then here in the FCT. What it means is, like I said, somebody can commit an offense somewhere and, run, to another state and continue living. I mean, if you commit an offense in Lagos and they put out your name, you can just go to Ondo State and continue your life. And nobody knows anything, right? It is part of the Violence Against Persons Act. NAPTIP doesn't really have the wherewithal to make sure that this happens in every state. But what is NAPTIP doing? Are you talking with the state governments? When this register is established, will it be shared with security agencies in every state?
Yes, it will be shared with the police. It will be shared with service providers as well.
When you say service providers, which service providers are we talking about?
NGOs,
okay,
CBOs, who are ready to provide services to these victims,
okay,
to give them a new lease of life. So everybody would have a role to play in assisting that these victims are no longer traumatized and they are given legal representation depending on the services needed by the victim.
So the security agencies in all 36 states will have access to this, so that at least if somebody complains about somebody, even if that state doesn't have it registered, the security agencies have something to pull out and to work with.
And get in touch with that.
Okay, because we're talking off there and I was trying to ask that, what about when cases do not go through? Because you obviously said that this is just for convicted people.
Yes.
So if somebody has not been convicted, their names do not go on the register. This poses a little bit of a quagmire in the Nigerian society, where you have a lot of people decide, you know what, I'm not, going through with this case. Even if NAPTIP decides that it is a crime, so it is not for you to withdraw, it's a crime against the state, we are going to pursue it. If you do not have witnesses to corroborate stories and people are changing their stories or withdrawing it, getting a conviction is really hard.
It's really hard, and like I said, that's one of the problems we face in the agency. But my DG has said that we will go ahead. But also looking at the online sex offenders register, there are places where we will also enter the incidents reported, verified reported cases, convicted cases, and of course the registered service providers. So at the end of the day, probably if someone gets on keeping, it's always being reported, there is need for us to now investigate, and then my DG will therefore see that justice is done.
Okay, so you have access to report it, it's not like anybody else has access to that. Just NAPTIP has access to the reported incidents,
yes.
And then your commission can be followed through. What about for people who are not necessarily internet savvy? Will this list intermittently get on newspapers?
They may not necessarily have the list, but if you on social media, there have been instances whereby my DG has said we should paste pictures of pastors or whoever the offender is, and then by word of mouth, when you see someone whose picture is, somebody can go and say, oh, I saw this picture here, and it will go around. There is no tool that is too minimal or too great to raise awareness, to pass information. So every tool will be used, and then we also have an active hashtag Fight Human Trafficking in Nigeria. There are so many websites we could go to, and word of mouth and like what we're doing here
When
today.
trusting
Yeah.
word of mouth. Pictures go on this as well.
Yeah, pictures are self-explanatory. Pictures are
Aha.
self-explanatory.
So it's not just names, because
It's not
people
just
can
names.
have.
They are pictures. You know, when you see the picture, even if you are not literate, you say, what happened? What happened? You start asking questions. Oh. You know, it works. It works.
And it works that way.